and it's not just the Catholic Church. I know stories of people harmed in any number of denominations.
Oh my God.
And
so
male
yes.
power, just the male power structure that wants to protect itself. And I'm not saying women can't do that too, but this is a tradition where the males were in charge. And then, when you have like unnatural things like prohibiting males from, being married or whatever. And I recognize not everybody wants that. Not everybody chooses that. But, you're going to have problems. And again, there needs to be a level of humility and identifying with the vulnerable and identifying with the marginalized, I believe, in order to be the proper kind of leader in a spiritual setting, and by nature, again, I don't want to discount men here, but by nature, women are more connected typically to that, and that has to do with all the pain that we carry too. And so I guess the place I was going with that is, I still have respect for and am part of the evangelical American church. For a while I wasn't, and I found a place, my husband and I have, where we respect the teaching, we respect how they view more marginalized communities and the loving atmosphere. I'm not saying that, we're all people, we're going to make mistakes. So I'm not looking for somebody who never makes a mistake. What I'm looking for is someone whose actions support their words, and I look at how someone treats others.
Welcome to the Weekly Transit. Interviews and conversations from an astrological lens. There's nothing more fascinating to me about this earth than the people who inhabit it. My mission is to create deep, vulnerable, and open conversations that invite our unique guests to share the arc of their ever-evolving journey through life, in the hope that their stories inspire and resonate with you, our listeners. I'm your host, Scott Tejerian. Welcome to the Weekly Transit. I am your host, Scott Tejerian, here with my guest today is Jennifer Palo. Am I saying your last name right? Palo?
Palo.
Jennifer Palo. Thank you, Jennifer. Jennifer Palo. Jennifer Palo is a writer, an intuitive. She has a blog, I guess you would call it, or a newsletter that comes out every week called The Healers Are Rising. It's her beautiful take on the world and her perspective on things. And Jennifer is somebody that I met back in 2018 when I was just beginning as a professional astrologer. That was like the very beginning of me becoming a professional astrologer. And Jennifer was one of my first readings. And she is a fellow Scorpio sun like me. She's a Gemini moon and an Aquarius rising. And we were just talking before I hit record, and I was like, well, let's talk about this when we're recording, because I wanted to hear. So how did you hear about me to begin with? How did we connect?
Well, first off, I just want to say thank you, Scott, for inviting me to this.
You're
as
welcome.
I said, when I got your email, I was a little bit I was excited and then a little scared, and I was like, wow. So this is a real honor to be here with you. I appreciate it.
Yes,
you put out a lot of goodness into the world, and I just feel privileged to sit in on one of these sessions with you.
Amazing. Thank you.
So thank you.
You're welcome. Yeah.
And likewise.
Great to have you here. Yeah.
As for how we met, this is kind of interesting. Way back in, I think it was 2014 or 2015, when I first got on Instagram, because I was kind of a holdout with all the social media stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And back then it was kind of a brand new world for me. So I would hashtag a lot of things, and that brought other people who were doing similar things across my feed. This was back before all the advertisements were in there and all of that.
Mm-hmm.
And you came across my feed because we both were taking a lot of sky and nature pictures.
Uh-huh.
And so I just remember liking some of the different things. You did a lot of black and white of palm trees against the sky. And I like silhouettes like that too.
Yes.
And so there were other people I was also meeting through this. It was just all these creatives out here on Instagram. Isn't this cool? And so I was following you and liking some of your things. And then I noticed after a while you dropped off and you weren't there anymore. And again, I was following other people and putting my own things up, and I just kind of, oh, okay.
Yeah.
And then it wasn't too long later, like sometime in 2016, 2017, you'll have to correct me,
Hmm.
when you came out saying that you were now following a path of astrology after long study and you were going to be offering readings. And I was like, woohoo, Scott, because I myself was in not so much astrology, but a similar path of like um, exploring my intuitive gifts,
Hmm.
the mediumship part. And I was kind of thinking, how does this all work with the kind of background I have and the kind of people that are in my life? And so when I saw that you were following that path and committing yourself to the study, I just love cheering people on who are doing cool things. And
Mm.
so I was excited for you. So started following you with your regular output you were doing on Instagram. Eventually, I think you were doing the podcast, but at any rate, we had in the span there at the end of 2017 moved from Minnesota to California,
Right.
and there were a lot of shifts taking place, obviously in our location of where we were living, but even in how I was going to move forward, in career, in personal um, growth, and all of
Mm.
that. And somewhere in 2018, I reached out to you then
I remember.
for a
Yes.
reading, and we did a virtual reading like this, and I knew you were in LA, so that was neat. But yeah, and so I found that what you shared was um really insightful. It really resonated, and I felt too like you were a kindred spirit,
Mm.
someone who really wants to delve, I mean, I guess fellow Scorpio, wants
Yes.
to delve into all of these things and isn't afraid of it.
Hmm.
And that's how I felt. I was like, I'm not afraid of some of this deeper knowledge that's maybe more mystical, or
Yes.
a different language, as you call it, which I think is a beautiful way to put it with the
Hmm.
astrology. So I loved meeting with you, and I have a bit of astrology experience and background because my sister-in-law is an evolutionary astrologer,
Okay.
and she does very in-depth readings for folks. And she had shared with me just a few things about my chart, and she's shared with my husband, her brother, and things like that. So,
Hmm.
but I had never done anything in depth with her. So you were the first person that I had ever allowed to take a look at my chart.
Wow. What an honor. I really appreciate that, Jen. I mean, wow. Do you take me back with the Instagram? Because, I first got on there, I think maybe in 2013, maybe 2012, somewhere around there. And I didn't show my face on Instagram until 2017. Maybe 2017 was maybe the first time I showed my face, or 2018 maybe even. It might even been 2019, 2020. I don't know. I'd have to go back and look because I was really hesitant about. So I can empathize with you in terms of like, oh, it's cool. Like Scott's wants me to be on his podcast, but like I'm a little scared, Like you're not the
Yeah.
first guest that's told me that. It really, and I can really empathize because I was freaked out about putting my face on Instagram, and because I was all about the palm trees and the sunsets and the buildings and cool angles. And if you're out there listening, you want to scroll back far enough, 1,000 posts plus on my Instagram, you'll see these old photos that I took, and I really love them. It was kind of like my creative awakening in a sense. I was just walking around Los Angeles and just appreciating the beauty that I saw in the mundane of life, a palm tree, a building, a sunset, a cloud. And so I really I amassed like a couple thousand followers doing that. And then I did go off for a while. I stopped up being on Instagram because I was just very focused and obsessive about learning astrology. And then I kind of like came back, like I'm back and this is what I'm doing now. And so, and you were one of the first people to reach out to me for a professional reading. And so it was really exciting. You were very kind and supportive of what I was doing. And I always appreciated that about you. And so, yeah, I mean, they told me that someone had told one of my first readings that I did with somebody was somebody that I knew, and he said that he's like, well, if you want to make this into a business, then you're going to need to put your face out there, because I'll tell you right now, he's like, the reading you gave me was amazing, but if I didn't know you, there's no way I would do a reading with you, because I haven't even seen your face. You know, I don't know who you are. I don't know anything about you. And so you've got to put yourself out there to some degree and show people who you are. And so now I'm here doing these podcasts, and it's like, what a change, you know, but it
Well,
was a lot. It's like, you know, as a Scorpio, like I'm like in my cave, don't want anyone to see me, you know, and so it's very strange to now all of a sudden be out there. And I understand astrologically why I'm able to do this as well. And I do enjoy it, but there is a lot of fear with that Scorpio frequency. But you're born with the rising sign in Aquarius. And so, you know, you've got that extroverted part of your primal triad and Gemini rising, but you know, let's kind of go back a little bit. So you moved from Minnesota to California. You grew up in Minnesota. You'd lived your whole life in Minnesota?
no.
No.
Now, I did grow up there. For a couple of years, we lived in Washington. Let's see, for 2 years out of my first four, we were in Washington State for a bit because my father was there for the Army.
Whereabouts?
The area of Tacoma, I think there's a base near an Army
Okay.
base. And
Yeah.
then we moved to Germany in
Oh, wow.
Mainz, which is across the river from Wiesbaden. Big
What's it called?
military. Mainz. M
Mainz? Mainz?
Mainz, Mainz. And
Okay.
there was an army base in Gonsenheim, which is a small village, kind of suburb, I guess you could say, of Mainz.
Mm-hmm.
That's where we lived for a while. And but other than that, the rest of all my upbringing was in northern Minnesota.
How long were
Um,
you in Germany?
2 years, so the
Okay.
ages of 2, 3, and 4, and it was very impactful because I think that's where we were. First off, we were not living on base. We lived in the community in an apartment building, so we had German neighbors, and I was at the age of malleability, right, where you're learning everything and language
Mm-hmm.
and exploring the world. And we had neighbors who were an older couple, didn't have any children, but they had a lot of nieces and nephews who were always coming over to their house. And somehow I got enveloped in that and became kind of like one of their nieces. And that's where I learned German at a
Oh,
very
so
young
you
age.
learned German even though you were
Yes.
only there from like 2 to 4?
Yeah, but you
You
think about those ages, those are really impressionable ages where
Yes.
you're acquiring language like at, breakneck speed, right? You're acquiring all these things. And so I guess that impacted me in that, well, first off, my parents didn't learn German. I was very outgoing and curious, and we just
Mm-hmm.
happened to have, by God's grace, these really kindly neighbors who welcomed me in. They were my German Tante and uncle, Hans and
Mm.
Margaret Becker. Um, and so from there, I was imprinted with the idea that foreign is good. Foreign and different is good because
Hmm.
I lived it.
And that's that Aquarius rising is just like the appreciation of individuality and
Mm,
being different. Also the connection to community. And it sounded like you were involved in the German village or community as a young little girl, but your Mercury, the planet of communication, is in the ninth house, which is associated with the ninth sign, which is Sagittarius. And Sagittarius is the archer, the traveler, foreign cultures, foreign
mm.
lands. So that would make sense why you were able to pick up that language.
Yeah. And I think too, I was kind of the bridge between Hans and Margaret and my mom because my mom didn't speak any German, but I picked up enough. So of course there were permissions going between them and my mom, whether
Mhm.
I could go over there for this thing and, all that adults have to coordinate for kids. And so I was a little interpreter. And but anyway, so that was a beautiful thing. There were hard things that happened in my life too in Germany that I didn't know of until the last 5 years where my
Oh.
PTSD diagnosis came up. But for the most, where trauma occurred to me. But the overarching thing that came from growing up in those impressionable years in Germany, was that foreign is good, different is good, different is welcoming, different is engaging, different is loving. And so I'm thankful for that because I see how that informed my life years and years down the road, um, and caused me to always be open to different.
Mm,
Yeah.
yeah, very Aquarius. Is there so you had some like regression work done or something that awakened you to some trauma that occurred in your childhood that you had forgotten about? Is that what happened there?
No, actually, I think it was just timing, and they do often say that um, things will come up in your life when you have the safety and ability to deal with them
Hmm.
properly. You know, like you maybe have heard about people who've been in war or in, very traumatic circumstances, and somehow they're still able to like go on with their life. And it's like you went through that difficult thing, or you're a veteran of that war, and yet you came back and you held down a job and raised a family and all of that. And but then sometimes after a while, what happens is the body and the brain can't contain it any longer, and it starts to flashback. In my
Hmm.
case, I started having flashbacks in the spring of 2019. Previous to that, when I had taken my daughters to Germany in 2015 to visit this dear lady that I referred to, Margaret Becker.
Uh-huh.
By then, her husband had passed away, but I had visited her several times over the years because I chose to go into foreign language and international studies for my majors in college. So that involved studying abroad. Whenever I was overseas in Europe, I would go and visit Hans and Margaret, and then eventually just Margaret, because
Hmm.
Hans had passed. Anyhow, I had the desire in 2015, to take my two oldest daughters with me to Germany. I hadn't been in years, and I knew Margaret was getting older. She was in her 80s, and I wanted her to at least meet some of my family.
Hmm.
Couldn't take all six of us, it wasn't in the budget.
Hmm.
But so I got to do that. But, anyways, when we were there, wonderful, lovely time. But she still lived in that same house, which was across the alley from the apartment building I had been in. And when I was looking at that apartment building, I got this really sick feeling. And I just thought, okay, I had had some sense that something bad had happened there. But I acknowledged it and I just let it go because we were having a lovely day with Margaret and her family in the garden and back. But then I just kind of had known that something had gone wrong for me. And so in 2019, I started to have flashbacks, and they were very intense and they were very violent. And I was like, okay, this explains a lot of things why I've had certain hangups or issues over the years, or and certain issues with my body.
Hmm.
And so from there, I sought out a therapist who specializes in EMDR.
Oh,
And I know
right.
Gabriella has talked about it before on the
Yes,
podcast. And
exactly.
so, yeah, this was in 2019. And so I didn't discover all that in therapy. It came to me, and it was very overwhelming and very vulnerable feeling. And it was very violent. I was violently assaulted as a child and nearly died.
What?
Hmm.
Oh my God.
Yes.
And your
And
parents didn't know about
they
this?
didn't know because this was an acquaintance of the family, acquaintance of my father's through the army, who did this and who threatened me into silence that if I spoke, I
So,
would, yes, I or my father would be, our lives would end. So I had
so,
to hold all that for my parents' sake. And my parents were very young, very unstable. And so I had to hold a lot, plus continue on. It's amazing what the brain can do. I mean, Gabriella, being a therapist, knows far more about this. But um, your brain sequesters that
mhm,
trauma so you can survive and you can continue forward. But it's never gone and just kind of rattles around there for however many years until you
yes.
start to have a cognizant awareness of it. And then where EMDR was really helpful was it takes those trauma memories that have been compartmentalized, and it helps the body through like a, joining the two sides of the brain as you're looking at these pulsing lights or you're holding these pulsars in your hands. while you're recalling these incidents with therapy support, it's actually like rewiring the brain to then file those memories back as memories instead of this kind of amorphous stress trauma response that's constantly in the back there.
Yeah.
So it was a very powerful process. I didn't necessarily mean to get into all that with you,
No, I
but I
love it.
think,
No, I
but
mean,
I think
whatever
it's
you're open to
helpful
sharing. It,
because when you first did my reading, you showed me that in my second house there was a major issue regarding my security.
yeah, it's
Um,
your Chiron is there.
and this completely, and so when I had my first reading with you in 2018,
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know the full scale of what had happened to me and
Wow.
the silencing that had gone on at the hands of this acquaintance. And so when, I look back at this now and see that you had that insight, I was like, yeah, damn well something happened to my security back then.
Yes.
Yeah, I nearly died in a very violent physical attack.
So,
So,
but I'm just trying to understand if you don't mind, just trying to so you were violently attacked,
yeah,
but there were no like wounds or bruises or anything
right?
like that.
Yeah. It had to do with it was an assault,
Uh-huh.
and it had to do with strangling.
Okay.
So there was nothing,
There's like an asphyxiation
there was no
thing.
bruising or anything. And I
Mm-hmm.
was hurt inside as I went back through this in therapy. I was hurting inside, and I had trouble with swallowing and things like that after that. And I just had to kind of hide that. And my parents noticed that I was gagging and things like that, but they just thought, oh, fussy eater or whatever.
Uh-huh.
And so there was just a lot there. Not being able to speak about it, having the hurt in this area.
Yeah.
There was a lot there. Yeah.
I mean, so this person was left alone with you and
This person took advantage of an opportunity when adults were distracted with partying.
huh, right. And was it a sexual
Yes.
assault? Yes. Yes. So like when I look at your chart, I see uh, Mars is the planet that rules the physical act of sex. It's in the 8th house, which is the house that it rules, and it's opposing your Chiron. So that would indicate your Chiron's in the 2nd house in Aries, which is the sign that's ruled by Mars, which represents your self-confidence. The 2nd house represents security and value. And then the opposition to Mars in the 8th house could indicate a sexual assault or a wound to the masculine energy because of a sexual assault. That's one way to interpret it. Yeah.
Yeah. So I've gotten to the place where I can talk about it without
Mm-hmm.
having like that, like the
Yeah.
re-traumatization
Yes.
part. But it's not a pleasant thing to talk about.
Mm-hmm.
But in writing The Healers Are Rising, which is part of my healing journey, just you're talking about creative output and so on. That's why I first
Yes.
was on Instagram with taking photos, much like you, not showing my face, just showing what I was seeing in the world as a
Mm-hmm.
creative. The writing part has been really good for me. It's not like every week that I write, I'm writing about this topic, but it's helped me to understanding my story has helped me to see, yes, I was a victim, and it's helped me to identify that way because for so long I just had no idea why I had certain responses to things.
Mm-hmm.
And I've always been a highly functioning person, but certain anxiety responses and things. So it made me understand myself more.
Mm-hmm.
But it's obviously not my whole story, but it's a rather recent awareness of
Hmm.
just what my life started out like and
Yes.
the things I had to hold, things that happened to me, and the fact that I was always looking out for the people around me to protect them is not only worth the life of myself threatened, but my dad, who was a buddy with this person. And then I had a baby brother, and then I had a mom too, was young and dealing with her own issues. I was carrying a lot as a little kid. But then you see the strength that you're given. And the thing too, that what was really cool when I went through EMDR, and I have a very, supportive therapist who's well trained in that, someone's walking through that with you. So I just want to say to any listeners who visit Scott every week on this podcast, if you decide that you need EMDR therapy, find somebody who first off does it, but who's, really well trained in it. And I suppose you can only do it if you are well trained in it, but someone that you resonate with first off. It's a pretty intense therapy, and you can feel very exhausted afterward because you're processing a lot. But getting back to something wonderful that happened through that, when I went into the occurrence with the support of the therapist, I saw an angel. There was an angel in the room with me. So that's why the attack stopped. There was some noise from the other room. The attacker thought, I'm going to be discovered, threatened me, left. And so there I was trying to get myself together, but there was an angel there for me. So that was really a powerful thing that came out of, going back in the visualization of what was happening, that I was being protected in a sense, even though that happened. So.
Wow. That's amazing. You were born with the North Node, the soul's purpose, in the 12th house in Capricorn. In the 12th house is that faith, in the higher power, in angels, spirit guides. But, Capricorn is about reality. And so it's about bringing those angels, spirit guides, or God into reality. It's about taking responsibility for your unconscious. I want to thank you for sharing, these deeply intimate, personal, vulnerable parts of yourself with me and our audience. It takes a lot of courage, and Capricorn, Mars is exalted in Capricorn. So I think that part of the essence of Capricorn is to be courageous in taking responsibility for who you are. In your 12th house is taking responsibility for what's going on in your unconscious. And you had this part in your unconscious that was completely unconscious for years and years and years, but it was affecting the rest of your life. And at some point you had to take responsibility for what was going on in there. And it took a lot of courage to take responsibility for it, to acknowledge that this happened to me and has affected my life. But in taking responsibility for it, you have been able to control it and be the victor as opposed to the victim of the experience.
Yeah. It just goes to show that, what happens to us isn't our full story. It's what we choose to do then in the growth. And, there is grief with that. I had to let myself recognize that I was a victim, because for so many years I, didn't recognize that. And especially as a child, that's truly victimization, and innocent,
my God.
So I had to let myself feel that.
Yes.
I had, just not skip along and, I'm growing now. And I just, you have to let yourself feel that grief. You have to grieve for what, you lost, and so on, and anger and all those things you need to work through. And then, but the reality of it is, you mentioned the spiritual part. I have always known, even before I had the visualization of there being an angel in the room, that God is there for me. From a very young age, I had that. And I think there was really no other way for me to get through, because I was holding secrets. And, after a while, I think you're compartmentalizing things. So you're not even aware of what happened to you anymore, but the responses are built in. They're wired into you now. And so I just really see the hand of God in my life through all these different things. And even though I didn't start having the flashbacks till 2019, in 2014, we had a big, my husband and I and our family had a big, rather serious event occur where we had to separate from a family member who was extremely abusive and toxic. We as a unit, and then our eventually moving out here, I suppose, was part of that, but we were already healing and doing all that work in Minnesota where we were living. But at any rate, that in 2014 really broke open my mind to, first off, always believing that church is a safe place, always believing that love and forgiveness conquer everything. I had to learn just from working through things with the spirit, with the Lord, with journaling and a little bit of therapy too here and there, that forgiveness and trust are two different things. So you can forgive somebody who is constantly abusive or constantly manipulative or even harming your children with manipulation and spiritual abuse. You can forgive that, but that doesn't mean that you need to trust that person and continue to put yourself in that setting, whether it's with family or in spiritual community. And in our case, it was combined. It was family and spiritual community.
Family and spiritual.
Big part of our life. So that in 2014 was a kind of breaking open to like a download, not maybe with flashbacks from childhood yet, but I think it started the journey that then, as I was growing enough, when we were growing as a family and having discussions and recognizing we could no longer be part of a very toxic situation that was clothed in the name of Jesus and that was clothed in the name of, love and all that, but was actually manipulative and very ugly. That was very ground shaking too, because, I'm sure there are plenty of listeners out there. And Scott, I know you've referred to having a religious upbringing yourself. There's plenty of people out there who have experienced spiritual abuse. Some to the extreme of, the pedophile priest situations that are so sad. Others in other denominations that have happened as well. Young women and even a Southern Baptist situation. I mean, there's so many that make the news and there's so many more that don't. And the fact of the matter is there's a lot of good in church and in spiritual community, but too many of us, myself included, were naive to think that wasn't going to be in our setting.
Right.
And so having that be a major anchor and pillar in our lives, going from being part of everything in that particular church setting and with family to quietly stepping away to work on our own healing as a family, and then being accused of all kinds of things. This often happens. Often the person or the party who are the victims or the oppressed are accused then. Even if they quietly walk away, even if they're not making a big stink or seeking revenge.
There's something wrong with you.
And so you're not here, and this person is still here. And look, this person is doing all these nice, good things within the setting, and this person. And so not only did we have to do a courageous thing for the health of our family and step away, but we got dumped on. And I especially got dumped on because people are more comfortable dumping on a woman than they are on a man. And so all that said, that was in 2014. So that was the start of, okay,
do you remember when in 2014 that happened exactly?
Yeah, I started noticing the real seriousness of this issue with this person in March of 2014. And in September of 2014, my husband had a conversation with, we had a conversation with this person's spouse, and then we had a conversation, the two couples together, and our eyes were so opened at the lengths to which this person would go to uphold an image of spirituality, but underneath so much ugliness, that in September of 2014, my husband said, we can't be around this anymore. We can't be around this in church. We can't have the kids around this. This is really bad. Our eyes were very much open. So,
and this was a family member.
This is a family member. Yeah.
It's really wild that this was happening in 2014 because, first of all, I wanted to say that 2019 is when you became awakened to the abuse that occurred to you as a child.
Yes.
That was when Pluto, the god of death, the planet of transformation, was conjunct your North Node, your soul's purpose. And your soul's purpose is to take responsibility for what's going on in your unconscious. That's your soul's purpose. So when Pluto comes around and forms a conjunction one time in your life with your North Node, it's a reawakening of your soul's purpose, which is like, okay, Jennifer, we
Yeah.
know that this was something that happened to you that is uncomfortable. We don't want to, have you relive this, but we can't just keep this buried beneath the surface here. It's like a dead rat that's been, brushed under the rug, and everyone's like, what does that smell? Somebody's
Yeah.
got to pull back the rug and clean it up. It's not pleasant. Nobody wants to do it, but it's the only thing that can be done. Otherwise, you have to deal with that stench. And you had that stench in your unconscious, and it needed to be brought up so that you could clear it out. Now, in 2014, that's when Pluto was squaring your Chiron. And Chiron is that wound, which, like, when you think about it, I always tell people, like, the experiences you have in your life, they're the same experience. Every experience that you had until you were 7 years old just repeats itself in a different manner throughout your life. Because at 7 years old, that's when you become like, it's like the clay that goes in the kiln, as like for the pottery, where it's like the form is set. Because at age 7, that's when you experience your first hard aspect with Saturn. That's when Saturn squares your Saturn, is at age 7. This is why there's that old, I think it was a Marilyn Monroe movie called The 7-Year Itch. Came out in the 1950s. It was about, how like at 7 years in a relationship, you kind of get that itch that, maybe this isn't the person I'm supposed to be with. I want to move on to something else, because it gets real. There's something hard about it. And at age 7, that's when you realize that I'm not of my parents. I'm my own person. I'm separate from them. And so age 7 is when Saturn squares Saturn. And so Saturn squaring Saturn at age 7, it kind of solidifies the experiences you have, and then you just repeat them over and again. And so you experienced abuse before age 7. And so sure enough, several years later, so in 2014, that's when, let me see if there's anything happening with Saturn and your Saturn. No, so it already gone past its square. But, you're basically experiencing a different version of the abuse.
Right.
So, it's not
Definitely.
physical, sexual abuse, violent abuse, but it's a mental, manipulative abuse that's occurring here. And so we talked about the reason why that abuse occurred in your life was because Chiron in the 2nd house in Aries, opposing Mars in the 8th house in Libra. Libra is about balance, fairness, harmony, peace. And you, during 2014, your security was being threatened. And there was not peace in the intimate relationships that you have with family. You did not feel safe with them. And that's because Pluto was squaring your Chiron. Now, in addition to that, so Pluto was squaring your Chiron from your 12th house. That was kind of like helping you wake up. It's like that first alarm before you actually wake up. And you needed to have that experience in order to be awakened in 2019.
I believe so.
Yes. So in addition to that happening, though, with Pluto, though, was Uranus, which is the planetary ruler of Aquarius. The planetary ruler of Aquarius, which is your ascendant, was actually transiting through your 2nd house, conjunct your Chiron. So it was like waking you up in terms of your self-confidence, your material security. You're going through a revolution of what it means to be secure, what it means to be self-confident, what it means to connect, with other people in an intimate way, in a peaceful way. That was all occurring in 2014.
Yeah. Yeah, it was intense. And the hard part was too, it affected my children. Yeah, it was really tough. It was tough to be blamed for a lot of things, to be misconstrued, to basically be an exile from the church.
Mm.
But God provided other things. We found a different spiritual community. We, continued forward. We had a lot of difficult family discussions, and eventually, some people who had known issues with this person for years and years and years, um, you know, came around and were willing to talk through things. And all that said, it's just I let go a long time. I mean, I always forgave this person but I didn't have to trust the person. And those were two things that I had conflated for years. When we were in this abusive relationship, I was like, well, you got to forgive, and I love this person. I'm just going to show more love and show more love, and love wins out, and love conquers all. Just, kind of a little bit too idealistic and naive, but also that's some Christian messaging though, too. That's not trauma informed, and not, plus I wasn't fully trauma informed. So all that said, I can't blame myself for all that stuff. But I did have a forgiving heart toward that person. But when I finally just realized that this is not going to change, whatever we do or I do or say is never going to be good enough. I was putting so much mental energy into how I could please this person and finally get this person to see that I was sincere. I was like, no. So forgiveness and trust are two different things. And that's something I've said over the years to many people, and I've written about people, however you are led in whatever situation you're in. And Scott, I admire that you've talked about forgiveness, considering, your background and even your family line and things your family line has dealt with.
Mm-hmm.
Forgiveness is important, but no one can make you forgive someone, and don't ever let someone guilt you into, saying you forgive. It's a real process. And, when you've been violated in different ways and, so on. But on the other hand, forgiveness frees you from the constant, thinking about that person. But the trust, if you can never trust that person, a break sometimes is necessary. Other times there's room for, some contact and whatever. But in this case, there's some things that just aren't going to change.
And
And
so
you
it was
and
never,
you
yeah.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
right, never resolve. So the
Mm-hmm.
way I've looked at this is sometimes you've got to release somebody in love, because if you're doing more to gain that person's love and it's harming your family unit and your brain is all worked up all the time, and not able to focus on your life because you're trying to figure out how to work this out, it's not right. And especially with me being a mother of kids, I had to think about being there for my kids.
Yes.
And not that I wasn't, but so that was a very hard process, because loyalty is a big thing for me. And then within the context of the church, where love and forgiveness and esteeming others is better than yourselves, and all that which is true. But too often Christian, especially male leadership, and maybe non-trauma informed or non um, therapy informed leadership, makes everything very very black and white. Well, if you can't be with that person, then you're wrong and you're whatever. And not willing to look at the subtleties and the complexities of situations, but just doesn't want to, often I've seen, deal with really sticky issues that you know they don't want to touch. And so that's where we just had to be leaders for ourselves and quietly move along and work on our healing and work on our rebuilding community. And eventually, unexpectedly, that took us to California. And you had asked me if we'd always lived in Minnesota. Well, my story started out in Minnesota and then a bit in Germany, and then we came back to Minnesota. I grew up all those years there, went to college. As I said, I studied international studies in German at the University of Minnesota, and I did a study abroad in Austria. But then when I got back, I was starting to get involved in a relationship with who is now my husband, Dan. We were in a group of friends together previous to that. And so from there, life took us to his graduate studies in Connecticut. And I was in nearby Rhode Island. We got married there. We lived in the East Coast for 4 years. Life then took us to Washington State for his first job at a national lab, where I worked remote for the company I had worked for in Connecticut.
Where in
And
Washington was that?
That was what's called the Tri-Cities, Richland and Kennewick, and he was with a national lab there. And then from there,
And what's the national lab? What
It's
was?
Pacific Northwest National Lab. It was a Department of Energy National Lab. You've probably heard of like Los Alamos National Lab or different ones. Yeah.
And so
So
what does he do for work?
he's a chemical engineer.
Chemical engineer.
Yeah. Yeah. And I was working in the space of working for a translation agency. So multiple languages and recruiting translators. It was right in my line of study. So it was really wonderful.
How many languages do you speak?
Oh, I speak just German, and I
Just
can do a little French, and I can get by with a little Spanish and a little Italian, but German is the language. And the reason being, right, I was imprinted with German as a child, having lived there, and I kept in touch with Hans and Margaret Becker over the years through letters and things like that, with a smattering of German. And then when I lost the remembrance of German because I wasn't using it at all in my daily life and I didn't have it in school, I would always find like a foreign exchange student or something that could help me translate letters to and from Margaret and Hans. And then eventually when we got a German program in my high school, I joined right up and it came quickly. So that's why I decided, I'm going to study this in college and international studies too. So all that said, we were living in Washington State. We had our twin daughters there. And then 6 years after we had moved to Washington State, we moved to Oregon, to the Corvallis area, really lovely area. And we had our second two children there. And then we were there for 6 years, and we had this desire to move back near family so our kids could be raised near grandparents and aunts, uncles, and cousins. So we, in 2011, moved back to Minnesota to live in the area where Dan and I both were raised. And we were there for 6 years. We kind of have this funny 6-year plan. And that's when Dan was starting to travel a lot to California for client work because he was working in consulting, and our family was needing a change. And we love the West Coast. All of our kids were born on the West Coast between Washington and Oregon. And so that's when we moved December of 2017 to Marietta, California here.
And you've lasted longer than 6 years.
Yes, you're right. It was very perceptive. It was 7 years at the end of December, and so we've kind of broken a cycle. But it's been good for us. California's been
you're in Marietta, is that what you said?
Yeah, Temecula Valley area. And California has been very good for us. As you know, every place has its problems, but California, there's something about the energy here which is very open, and there's a lot of diversity. When we had moved back to Minnesota from having lived in a university town in Corvallis, where Oregon State is, my husband was kind of connected with the university there. It was just so different not hearing all the foreign languages and seeing all the, the different faces all the time, even for my kids, But Pete, we love being near our family, and there's the Native American community in northern Minnesota, which I love, and became friends with a few people there. But just the feeling of being at the crossroads of the world, you get that in California.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So that was really stimulating. And then just to be in a place where we could build ourselves again without the obligations of family, extended family, which we love. We have very good relationships with most all of our extended family. This was a very different scenario in that one case.
Yeah.
But it's been good that the ocean, as a Scorpio, and I really need the ocean. I really need to be in that environment where there's something so much larger than myself that overwhelms me in the most positive way. That's the Pacific for me. I call it my friend. And then same with the sky, and so it's been good being here. We've definitely had our struggles, but this is the place where I guess God just kind of saw, this is where you can start doing this healing work. And here you go. 2019. Here's the flashbacks. You had the support right in town to learn about an EMDR therapist. Wow. And then Scott, I had a reading with you not long after, maybe a year after that or so. But you spoke to this next thing I'm going to share in that reading. So I had my flashbacks in the spring. I started having I started seeing a counselor, a therapist. We just did some talk therapy first before we were going to get into EMDR. I had one, I think, EMDR session. And then not long after that, in July, I ended up having to go into the hospital and stayed in the hospital 10 days with something I never knew I had. I had apparently diverticulosis for years and years, never knew it.
Mm-hmm.
And I went into the hospital with a colon abscess. I mean, like out of the blue, I had no, I learned this after the CT scan.
Yeah.
And I basically had to have colon resection surgery.
Wow.
And part of me was like, God, this is so cruel. I'm already dealing with all this from my
Mm-hmm.
childhood, and now I'm in the hospital, and this is a serious situation. And I just had to flip that to, I believe that occurred to get that physical hidden trauma out of my body.
Yes.
And so when I had a reading with you within that year, you said, what was that date again? And you looked at my chart for that date and you were like, oh my gosh, can you see this? And all this stuff was clustered in this one area.
What, do you remember the date?
Let me, let's see. Oh, that reading you did for me was April 21st of 2020. And then the date of that occurrence when I went into the hospital was July 21st, I believe, of 2019.
Okay, let me see if I can.
And
Let me see if I can see what I was looking at again.
Yeah, you and I both looked at that chart, and we were both.
Oh yeah, it was because you have during that period of your surgery, there was the North Node, Venus, the Sun, and Mercury all transiting through the 6th house, which is the house that rules the intestines. And so, and then Saturn and Pluto. Pluto was conjunct your North Node. That's your awakening of your unconscious. Saturn was in the 12th house along with Pluto in the South Node, squaring your Mars in the 8th house. Your Mars is in the 8th house, which we've talked a lot about. And that's associated with the 8th sign, which is Scorpio. Scorpio rules the colon. And if you have this book, Heal Your Body.
I do.
Yeah. You see what it says about the colon? It says holding on to the past, fear of letting go. And so that's what you needed to do, was release the past, release those experiences so that you could be here now.
Yeah. My body, and I just had to appreciate my body for that. At first I was just so thrown, and you feel so vulnerable. And I was in the hospital for 10 days because we were trying to see if my white blood cell counts could come down and the abscess would, shrink down.
Mm-hmm.
And, before we did any surgery and stuff. And I remember a surgeon, when it came in to tell me, the results of my CT scan in the first several hours that I was, in the hospital, and my husband and I were just like, what? But he said to me, you must have been very tough in childhood. And I don't know why he said that. And he said, because the way your body enclosed that rupture, the way your body formed that abscess, it saved your life.
Wow.
And I was I was maybe not putting all the pieces together, but my body had saved my life. God had saved my life a couple different times. I had, back when in 2008, I had an emergency appendectomy. Mm-hmm. Again, with a rupture in my body.
That was
2008. So I've had all this strange stuff with my intestines, and I'm a person who takes care of myself.
And that was an emergency appendectomy?
Yes. So this was the second time then in 2019 where I'm in the hospital for something in my intestines that I did not see coming. But again,
and did you ever look up abscess in Heal Your Body by Louise Hay? Because
I probably have at some point, but not recently.
Fermenting thoughts over hurts, slights, and revenge. So you're fermenting you're fermenting your thoughts over that abuse.
Without realizing it.
Exactly. Without realizing it. And so, it's like the new thought pattern is, I allow my thoughts to be free. The past is over.
Yes.
I am at peace. And so you had created that to try that. It's almost like the trauma that you experienced as a child was in your unconscious, was pushed into your unconscious and formed that abscess in your body that was like contained in the colon, which is ruled by Scorpio. You're an 8th house Scorpio sun, and you're holding on to that past, but also like trying to keep it out compartmentalized away
Yeah.
from the rest of you.
Yeah. So it's just some wild stuff. But in it all, I just had to see, I had to give thanks. Like, okay, this is I have to believe this is meant for my good. That's
Mm-hmm.
what I've had to come back to again and again when things have happened where I felt extremely vulnerable, or like, where did this come from? Apparently, if I had had diverticulosis over the years, I would have had a lot of pain and other issues like that. I didn't have any of that.
Hmm.
So unless I was so accustomed to it that I just, had a threshold that I wasn't aware.
Yeah.
So all that said, a lot of ugly, yucky stuff here. But that was it was really neat to see when you had pulled up that date and you had shown me all those planets and stuff. You're like, Jen, something had to shift here. Something
Mm-hmm.
had to release big. And that's what it was. And since
Mm.
2019, I haven't had those kinds of major health things. I haven't had any more, major downloads of trauma or anything like that. I've just been working on my healing path. And I started to practice Qigong,
Mm-hmm.
which is kind of like a Tai Chi. And I'd heard about it for many years. And then after, I was home recovering from that major abdominal surgery, which I had a really good recovery. I was very thankful for it. Good surgeon. I was really provided for. Oh, and also the night before that big surgery, I saw another like angelic presence in the room. And I
Mm.
just had this sense like there's a warrior fighting for me, like God's giving me
Yes.
this. So all that said, just I think in anything, all these trials and things that happen to you that are not your fault,
Hmm.
there are aspects of, okay, but it's my responsibility to grow and learn from this and to move forward now with integrating this.
Hmm.
And it's a process. Again,
Mm-hmm.
you don't, reach acceptance, you don't reach forgiveness, you don't reach peace about something, overnight, and no one can push you to that. No one can tell you you just need to get over this, or if it's
No.
been there
Yeah.
for so long too, it's going to take a while. And so that's why I started to do, the healers are rising as part of,
Hmm.
I was working as an intuitive and a medium for a while because that was another gift that was really surfacing after 2014. And that's where you and I had swapped readings at one point. That's what happened in April of 2020. And then I did a reading for Gabriella, and you were gracious to recommend different friends to me.
Thank you so much for that, Jen. Absolutely beautiful, the way you articulated everything. Um, I am honored that you feel safe to share what your experiences. I feel like you're an Aquarius rising, and we're in this Pluto in Aquarius age, where Pluto is the planetary ruler of Scorpio, and Scorpio is the sign of secrets, and Aquarius is the sign that represents homosexuality, because it's ruled by Uranus, which is Venus upside down. So it's like love that's different than the norm, non-conforming. And the phrase of homosexuality is coming out of the closet. And so we collectively are all coming out of the closet in some way. We're needing to share more about ourselves in the public realm, maybe parts of ourselves that we're like, I don't want people to know this about me, but we have to be courageous in doing so, because either we're going to do it or it's going to be done for us. And if it's done for us, then it's going to be probably more uncomfortable. So this is, but I just have to say that I'm trying to think, like, you covered so much in that last, your flow. I really appreciate your connection to healing and understanding that, yeah, you don't have to have a podcast, you don't have to write a book to have an impact on the people in your life, and not just your family and your friends, but everyone that you come into contact with throughout your life. The person at the grocery store. It's like Gabriella and I will always laugh, like, you know, or I would say, like, when I worked at a restaurant, it was always the women's bathroom that was just a disaster zone, you know?
I had the same
And
experience.
and
Hmm.
Gabriella's like, yeah, because like that's the one place where like women, they're not seen, you know? And so they can just, you know, it's like you're saying, like women carry the pain and suffering of the planet, and then they go into the bathroom and they're like, screw it, like I don't care, like, you know, it's like you know, it's like, are you that person that pushes the shopping cart back into that spot in the parking lot where it's
Yeah.
supposed to go, or do you just leave it by your car, you know? So I mean, that's kind of how we can, you know, what is the impact that you're making, not only in your lives of your family and your friends, but in the people that you come into contact with in every day, even like driving in Southern California. And it's
Yeah.
like, there are times where I, you know, flip off a guy or honk the horn, and it's like, oh God. And I think about myself and I'm like, what if my people on the podcast knew that I was doing that? You know, if I flip somebody off or honk the horn or cursing, you know, it's just, these are, it's hopefully we're gaining a greater ability of self-awareness
Yeah.
in who we are and how we affect people, not just when we know people are watching, but even when we feel like we're hidden in the car and nobody
Mm.
knows who I am and I can be this way, or I'm in the bathroom and I'm leaving a mess here, or I'm in the grocery store parking lot and I'm just going to push my cart out where somebody's going to have to move it and put it away because I didn't do it. We have to think about how are we contributing to society. And you know, one thing about you that's so inspiring to me is how you're somebody who you would identify as a Christian.
Yeah, I mean, I have a hard time. I've had a hard time for the past 10 years really using that word because
Yeah,
it's been so co-opted, and
it brings a stigma.
it does, and it's come to mean something that I really don't want to be associated with. But what I would call myself is I'm a follower of Christ, you
Yes,
know, you know, Jesus is my guide. I mean, even when I was
yes,
doing readings, I was doing it through Jesus.
yes.
And so that I've not left off. I have not left off my, you know, I've appreciated, you've, you know, referred to some different Bible passages or stories. I've not left that all off,
Mhm.
but I've become, um, this might sound sacrilegious to some who don't understand what I mean, but I've become my own authority. I've had to take my own authority over all that instead of the tradition of a male pastor.
Mhm.
And don't get me wrong, you know, my husband and I are part of a church now again. For a while we weren't, but I really do have respect for that role. But I've also seen that role be more of someone who's in charge, but not someone who's leading. And I think
Yes,
there's a difference between it being a leader and just being in charge. And
exactly.
so someone who has the shepherding heart, whether a male or female, you know, spiritual um, leader, who
Hmm.
but who also cares about the oppressed, who cares about the vulnerable, and isn't just worried about the church image. There's just so much. Like, this is what I wrote about this past week in relation to pulling in some Gabor Mate quotes. But this is not the time for appearances. This is the time for hard work. And I've
Mm.
seen the church, by and large, too often be worried about appearances instead of the hard work of speaking truth and love and standing up for the oppressed, standing up for the vulnerable, like Jesus did. That's who
Well,
he
and
aligned himself with.
yes. I mean, you see that with the Catholic Church, right? I mean, like all the abuse that's happened with, like, you know, priests and altar boys and that whole, you know, stereotype. It's like ultimately they're most concerned about,
Image.
yeah, their image.
And, you know, I mean, and it's not just the Catholic Church. I mean, I know stories of people harmed in any number of
Oh
denominations.
my God.
And it's
So,
a male
yes.
power, just the male power structure that wants to protect itself. And I'm not saying women can't do that too, but this is a tradition where the males were in charge. And then, you know, when you have like unnatural things like prohibiting males from, you know, being married or whatever, and I
Hmm.
recognize not everybody wants that, not everybody chooses that, but you know, you're going to have problems. And again, there needs to be a level of like of humility and identifying with the vulnerable and identifying with the marginalized, I believe, in order to be the proper kind of leader in a spiritual setting, in a, you know, and by nature, again, I don't want to discount men here, but by nature, women are more connected typically to that, and that has to do with all the pain that we carry too. And so I guess the place I was going with that is, um, I still have respect for and am part of the evangelical American church. For a while, I wasn't, and I found a place, my husband and I have, where we respect the teaching, we respect how they view more marginalized communities, and the loving atmosphere. I'm not saying that we're all people, we're going to make mistakes. So I'm not looking for somebody who never makes a mistake. What I'm looking for is someone whose actions um, support their words, and I look at how someone treats others. I've gone away from, oh boy, that person's really doctrinally intelligent, and they know every doctrine, and they can have say the Bible backwards and forwards, and boy, they care about evangelizing and so on. That I used to be like, wow, that's how you do Christianity. And nowadays I'm like, I don't care what you say. How do you treat other people?
Mm-hmm.
How do you treat other people? Because that's what Jesus was all about.
Yes.
Sure, he had just as much information and teaching as the Pharisees and Sadducees. In fact, so much so that when he was 12, they were like, who is this kid who's speaking in the temple with authority? I mean, so he was, God incarnate. He was a channel of the divine.
Yes.
And yet over time, he did not hobnob with the religious leaders because they were against him. They were threatened by him.
Yes.
He was with
He was exposing them.
Yeah, he was with the fishermen. He was with the women of ill repute. He was with the lepers who no one wanted to touch. He was with the blind and the people begging. And he saw women, especially. That's what I want people to know. Women were some of the first who understood that he was going to die. Women were the first at the tomb. He gave women such a place of honor, and he was the most balanced human who ever walked the earth, his masculine and feminine in complete balance.
Yes.
So that's what I see in Jesus. That's why I'm his follower. But as for Christianity, I've had to really be discerning about how much I call myself that, how much I bathe myself in that, because I can hear you, Scott, or I can hear, the bishop in Washington, D.C. give her sermon a couple weeks ago. That's gone viral because of all that went with that.
I didn't see it.
It was a national service the day after the inauguration, and this female bishop, who was the bishop for this Washington, D.C. diocese, gave a wonderful sermon, and some people took it as the wrong way. But I can listen to something like that, and even if I'm not that denomination, I can hear the essence of it, which is unity, which is, not having a culture of contempt, which is care for the marginalized, care for the oppressed, mercy. And I'm not threatened because she's not in my camp, or she's not in my denomination, because I don't really have a denomination, or I'm not threatened by you, Scott, who looks into the language of astrology, because for me, that's one more way to see the divine source, the order that's in the universe, the order that's in how these planets move. I've been reading more up on astronomy, even knowing the constellations and looking at all those things. And so, I guess all that said, that's how I have a Christian background, and I suppose you'd say I'm Christian, but I'm a little bit careful about how I talk about that and in which setting, because so many people out there with spiritual abuse in their background.
Exactly. It's such a stigma, and so I really appreciate what you say. I mean, I can empathize so strongly, because when I grew up going to an Armenian church until I was 10 years old. So, the first 10 years of my life, I was baptized in an Armenian church, which is a very Orthodox based, it's like there's priests, that's the type of vibe. And in the actual, Sunday school was in English, but the actual sermon was in Armenian. So I didn't know what they were saying. And then at age 10, my parents decided we'd start going to a Presbyterian church because it was closer to where we lived. And because my dad, he was starting to have his spiritual awakening. I've talked about, some of the abuse that I experienced at the hands of my father at a young age. And then at age 10, he found Jesus, when I was 10, and he really changed. Like, his demeanor changed. Like, I wasn't afraid of him in the same way that I was afraid of him prior to 10, because it was like connecting to the word of God, to the Bible, to Jesus, like
Yeah.
kind of released him of all this angst that he was carrying around. And he said that, he got tired of going to the Armenian church because he's like, all the men are just out in the parking lot smoking during the sermon. He's like, I want to, it's more of a cultural thing than the actual religion. And so he's like, I want to experience what it's like to go to a church where people are really like excited for Jesus, And so when we first moved to this church, my parents were going to a Bible study there. It was like on a Tuesday night. Tuesday is Mars Day, the god of war. We were all all the kids were supposed to go in this one room and behave themselves. There was like a high school girl who was there looking after, like, I don't know, like, it felt like 15, 20 kids, because all these parents are in the Bible study. This was like one of my first experiences at this church. And of course, they tell us to stay in this room. As soon as they say that, like, we want to go outside the room, because like, we're in this big church. We want to see what's around and go explore and that sort of stuff. And I exit the room. I reach back to close the door, and my bedroom door, instinctually, the doorknob was on my left hand. That's how I would close the door, was with my left hand. And I put my hand back there instinctually, and unknowingly, I put my hand in the hinge, and some other kid slammed the door. As one of these thick wooden doors with the sharp edges. I mean, it took my finger completely off. It's gone. And so my parents rushed me to the hospital. They said they could reattach it, but it might not ever move again because it was so close to the joint. So I told them to leave it off. And so I was 10. The kid who slammed the door shut, years later, when I was in high school, his father, we went down to Mexicali, Mexico, for a mission retreat sort of thing. And it was a very intense experience. This boy who slammed the door on my finger, his father was a very hard man, and very like, fire and brimstone type of individual, and ruled with like an iron fist, and was very intimidating. And I did not vibe with him well at all. So it was a very difficult experience. I was like, I don't ever want to do something like this again. It was not fun for me being there, being away from home. It was not a good trip. When we got back, all of the kids were brought in individually into like the church council, in the same room where my parents were having that first Bible study. And like, the church council was asking us a lot of questions about this one girl, this high school girl on the trip, and this man. And apparently something had gone on, where he might have been inappropriate with her in some way. This man who's like in his 50s, with a girl who's like, 15 or something. And and I don't know whatever happened with it. It was like kind of an in-house sort of thing. And I don't know that both families might have gone away from the church or something. I don't really remember or know, but I just remember it made me think differently about, like, the trip in and of itself made me think differently about the church. I didn't think differently about Jesus, but I
Right.
thought differently about the church. And then same when we got back and I had this like inquest, to know what was going on this trip with this man and this teenage girl. And that was like, something's not right here. And then there was another experience I had with like other kids that went to different churches that were in my high school, that, they were really strict in their beliefs, but yet their behavior did not reflect their belief. And so that kind of made me, and I was in this very confused place in high school where I was like drinking and partying and wanting to like hook up with girls and, sexually curious and all that sort of stuff. But also, being restricted by the religion and everything. And so I tried not to be judgmental of people, in understanding that I'm going through my own sort of experience here that is not, necessarily where I'm like wondering, like, am I Christian? Is this, because I'm having these feelings that are saying that I'm a bad person. And so, that's when I started to, split off, was like, and then I went to college and I tried to join a church, but they were so strict and it did not seem open. And I felt like Jesus is open. Like Jesus is not, this or else. He's leading with love. And so I love that you are open to receiving the astrology and the mysticism. Jesus is a mystic.
Right.
He's not someone who's like the priest of a church.
Right.
He's a mystic.
He's
and so
from
when
outside.
Christians,
Yeah.
I meet with people all the time who are like, well, my family, this or that, because I come from this religious family and they don't like the astrology because in the Bible it says this, that, or the next thing. I had a girl, my first crush at my high school reunion this last year. I saw her and I told her what I was doing, and she was like, how can you do that? Because you're a Christian. And I was like, first of all, who created the planets and stars?
Right.
God. Okay. Well, what am I doing? I'm looking at God's work.
Exactly.
Every time I look at somebody's astrological code, I see the work of God. I see a divine, unique miracle. And, I understand the passages that you read from the Bible that say that you're not, that, looking at the stars is wrong. You have to understand the context of what's being written and who it's being written by. When Paul is writing to the Babylonians and chastising them for looking at the stars, well, the Babylonians are maybe using this language to subvert God. And that's not what I'm doing. I'm doing it the opposite of that. I'm doing it to empower people and to not empower them in a way where they think that they can get away with something and harming and disrespecting others, but actually empowering them. So once they're empowered themselves, they're empowering other people.
Yeah.
And that's God's work.
Yeah, exactly. And I thank you for sharing all that about your church experience and your father's experience.
I literally just had that epiphany right now that the son who severed my finger was the kid who severed my finger was the son of the guy who kind of severed my relationship to the church, because after that trip I was like, I'm not going to be a preacher. I'm not going to be a pastor. There's something here. Like, I love the pastor of this church. I think he's a good man. I know he's a good man, but I just see so many instances where people are like kind of pumping their chest out about God and Jesus, but then they're doing things behind closed doors that are disrespecting others and harming other people.
Exactly. And what I liked about what you shared too is your father was kind of the impetus for this, where he realized he didn't want just empty religion anymore. He wanted like a relationship with God through Jesus. And that's what I would say that I have, and that's available to anybody. It's not just
Yes.
me. I feel like Jesus is my friend, a guide, and so on, my savior.
Yes.
But the part about church is, and this is what Jesus, spoke up against when he walked the earth.
Exactly.
Is he spoke to the reigning, religious leaders of the day, the Sadducees, the Pharisees, and all these other sects that were actually infighting all the time for power.
Yeah.
And he, was there to challenge that and say, wait, we've gotten away from the essence of what this walk with God is supposed to look like. And exactly what you're saying, Scott, he called them whitewashed sepulchers. On the
Yep.
outside, they were, very upstanding and wore beautiful spotless robes and had their tassels and all the good stuff. But behind closed doors, they were, doing all the things that we know are not right.
Exactly.
And so I do want to say about astrology, and I wrote about this before, astrology is in the story of Jesus' birth. The Magi, the wise men,
Exactly, right?
they were
following
astrologers.
the stars to get to
and
Jesus.
they were using that for truth.
Yes.
So it all comes down to this, whether it's astrology, whether it's, Bible study, whether it's whatever it is, even intuitive work or mediumship work. Are you doing that, as a service to fellow humanity, like you're talking about, in love, wanting to empower, encourage people, wanting to help them walk beside them for a little bit in their healing journey, or are you using it for your own ends? Are you using it to control others? Are you using it to prey on the innocent, like the situation that you were, somewhat a witness to? Are you using it to hold power over others? Are all these things that is completely not Jesus, and completely not the divine and the spirit of love and truth, that we want to follow. So, but yeah, astrology is right in the story of Christ. It's they studied the stars so that they would know where to find him. The people of his own culture weren't doing that.
Yeah.
So, this is where, again, I say, the foreign or the other is good, because it can bring in an aspect that we haven't been willing to see within our little bubble. Whether it was, the people who didn't necessarily, now there were people who knew to look for Jesus in his culture. There was, a priestess named Anna, and there was another priest in the temple that they had been expecting him. They were studying the scriptures, but the rest of the society was looking for someone born in a palace who would be a conqueror.
Exactly.
Whereas the wise men simply looked at the stars and what was, and they followed the star. And when the star was there over that stable or wherever, they were living at the time, they were like, okay, this is it. Sure. And they weren't looking for all those things that maybe the society of the Jews was looking for, the wealth, the power. They simply used as you said, God's creation to zero in on, wow, here is this special one who's been born, sent from God, So that's where I feel bad that people aren't willing to kind of open up to the essence of truth in other forms. It's only the Bible, it's only a set, group of Christian writers that I'll even look at, or it's only one kind of news or one kind of radio I'll listen to. And I do recognize, we can't necessarily cover everything, but what I always look for is light. Am I sensing light and love coming through these individuals or these resources? If it feels a little off, okay, much like you did back in your day, that trip and the questioning thereafter and all the vibes I was feeling, no thanks. This isn't a safe, secure place for me. So yeah, it's all that I just we've tried to raise our kids in that, having a healthy skepticism without being like jaded or cynical.
Yes.
Right. But having enough of that healthy skepticism to say something doesn't feel right here, even if it's labeled with things that we're comfortable with.
Yeah, I've said, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, I've said for years, I'm like, if Jesus was alive today, he wouldn't be a Christian.
Yeah, because what does it become? Don't get me wrong. I am grateful for the upbringing that I had in a very fundamental Bible church. I mean, I know a lot of the Bible because I was steeped in it, and I, went to like youth retreats and things like that, a mission kind of thing or whatnot. So it's part of me and I'm thankful for it. And a lot of that was very good. But in the last, 10 years or so, the way that the church has gone and the way they've aligned themselves with certain movements and even political things really concerns me.
Yes.
And so that's, I haven't like given up on the church, as I said, but I'm a lot more aware and I'm seeking to be discerning. And am I still sometimes led astray? Yeah. I sometimes still like let somebody
Of
into
course.
my circle who I shouldn't have and who ended up
Mm.
having ill intention or whatever. But it doesn't go as far and for as long, where I wise up and say, this, or God actually says, no, I'm taking this person out of your sphere, out of your path, or taking
Hmm.
this situation out. It's best for you, so all that.
Yeah, I don't think that Jesus would choose a side either in terms of like, I'm voting for this person or I'm
Yeah.
endorsing that person. I identify as red or blue. Like, I don't think that Jesus would take a side. Jesus is going to be somebody, he's somebody who uh is open to accepting and loving everyone. That's the whole point.
Yeah.
And I think of like in terms of the astrology, like just we're living in the age of Pisces. And Pisces is symbolized by the fish. And that's Jesus's symbol before
Yeah.
the cross is the fish. He turned water into wine. He brought fish to the people. I mean, that's the water and wine is ruled by Pisces. Walking on water, I mean, that's Pisces frequency. Jesus is about faith. That's what Pisces is about. It's faith. And Jesus was about suffering.
Yeah.
And that's what Pisces is. And so you, as a 12th house North node, that's the final house, which is associated with the final sign, which is Pisces. What did Mary Magdalene wash? Jesus's feet. The feet are the weight that carry the entire body. The feet are the body part that's associated with Pisces. And so, this is the age of Pisces. This is a period where we are, meant to cultivate faith through suffering, through understanding the suffering of others, through having empathy and compassion for others. And so any leader, if you can even call a politician a leader, they're basically a political figurehead that represents some of the country and the interests of the country. But a real leader is somebody that's inclusive of everyone and
Right.
is listening to everyone and has empathy for everyone. And through that empathy is going to show compassion and is going to help reimagine the dream where we can all feel like we are included, like we all belong here, because we do. We're all connected, and it doesn't matter how much you want to separate yourself from this group, that group, or the next group. You're reflecting them. You're a part of them.
Yeah. Yeah. Instead of the othering and
Yes.
the polarization.
Yes.
Yeah, that's because I have.
Because wasn't Jesus on the cross with like people that had committed crimes, but he's with them and he has empathy for them,
Yeah.
right?
Yes.
Yeah.
And one of them was willing to see Jesus for who he was, and the other
Mm,
was not.
yes.
And that person, the thief on the cross, basically Jesus, said, "Today you'll be with me in paradise," not because he had a chance to go out and do all kinds of good stuff and clean
Right.
his life up, no,
Mm-hmm.
because he was there dying, but because,
Yes.
as you said, Scott, the faith. He looked
Mm-hmm.
over and just saw, the love and the sacrifice of God, and
Yes.
there it was. And
Yes.
that's, I think, the faith is really where it's at. Like, we all have faith in something, and I just appreciate your platform here, Scott, and your openness, because you aren't afraid to go there. Because with
Mm.
anything, no matter what we do, whether you're into astrology or your Bible, or you're, if you're super scientific, whatever, all of that
Yep.
takes faith. And
Mm-hmm.
so, but what is like our faith really in? Because we're having to recognize if we've been focusing on building an image or an appearance of something, right now I feel we're being called to like dig down in and really, come to terms. And you're saying this too, like with ourselves and the healing that we need to do, and not just being having a scar that's consistently getting opened and we're getting activated with the scar, but actually allowing a wound to actually form. I mean, sorry, not just having a wound that's being constantly opened up, but actually allowing something to scar over so that
Mm,
we can actually, have it healed. Not that you don't still have the scar that points to the experience or the thing you learned, but it's not ruling your life anymore. It's just part of your story.
exactly.
So anyway, there's a lot there, but I really appreciate that you have such an openness here and such a non-judgmental attitude.
The feeling's mutual. I mean, I appreciate your openness and non-judge because you are so, and this is again like your Aquarius rising is, you are like the non-conformed Christian. Like
Mm,
it's like you don't fit into that box.
yeah, I
You're
guess.
somebody who has a very strong connection to Jesus Christ, but at the same time you are open and interested in and connected to mysticism and astrology and mediumships and all that sort of stuff that like the traditional church will look and say, well, that's you're being the heretic, or you're that's satanic. And it's like, no, it's not. It's
Yeah.
not.
And it
So
fell, and a lot of that fell on me. I never
mm,
asked to see an angel. I never asked to be visited by my elderly neighbor who passed with a message for
yes.
his son, which kind of started my medium thing. All that
Mm,
fell on me. And if that
yes.
fell on me, that had to be from the divine.
Yes.
And,
Exactly.
and with as you've pointed out to me, the kind of chart I have, it's a very like spiritual seeker kind of chart.
Oh
And
yeah.
so I've just had to say, I'm not going to push this stuff aside.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to explore it in the way that feels light to me. Have I
Mm,
encountered some medium psychic types who are not light and I have,
mm-hmm.
so
Absolutely. Yes.
I just align myself with those where I sense that integrity,
Mm-hmm.
that openness to learning, that wanting to use it for good. And that's the energy I focus on, whether,
Yes.
yeah. So, um, yeah. And
Yeah. I
that's,
I love like looking at your chart, and just like that spirituality and the and and that connection to spirit. Like, well, first of all, I wanted to say real quick, you were born with the moon in the fourth house, which is the house where the moon rules, because the moon rules the fourth sign, which is Cancer. This is your strong connection to the ocean, but also to home, to family.
mm,
And then Saturn, the planet of restriction, is conjunct your moon in the fourth house. So this is why you've had hard experiences in childhood or in family life, because of Saturn conjunct the moon. But then, like the spirituality part, it's like in that connection to your faith. Like you were born with the sun sextile Jupiter, and Jupiter, like when you look at the symbol for Jupiter, it's a cross of matter and a crescent of receptivity pointed out, symbolizing the possibilities that exist beyond your present reality. And it literally looks like, when I draw the symbol, it looks like that, like if you were to jump off the ledge, it'd be like that track of like taking a leap of faith. And so Jupiter is the planetary ruler of Pisces and Sagittarius, which are signs that are associated with faith, religion, spirituality. Jupiter is at 3 degrees in Capricorn in your chart, and your sun is at 2 degrees in Scorpio. So it forms a strong aspect to your identity, which means that you identify with having faith,
mm,
and connecting to a higher power. I mean, being born with the sun in the 8th house in Scorpio means that you also identify with merging power with others, being intimate with others, and also, having that strong connection to the psychic realm.
mm,
But then Neptune, the other planet that rules Pisces is at 3 degrees in Sagittarius, which is conjunct at the exact same degree as your midheaven. So Jupiter's at 3 degrees, Neptune's at 3 degrees, and then Pluto, the planetary ruler of Scorpio, which when you were born was in the 8th house in Libra, is also at 3 degrees. So I just think like Jupiter's at 3 degrees, the midheaven's at 3 degrees, Neptune's at 3 degrees, Pluto's at 3 degrees, Father, Son, Holy Spirit. You know, it's like the Holy Trinity, like 3 shows up 3 times or 4 times in your chart, if you consider the midheaven being the 4th time. Like, but you have 3 planets connecting with that midheaven point, which means that or Jupiter's not connecting, but Neptune and Pluto are connecting, which means that, you know, you are in that highest frequency when you are connected to God, to the angels, to spirit guides and the higher power, and having faith that even if I can't see it, taste it, touch it, smell it, hear it, I know it's there because I feel it. You know, there's been multiple times where we've been talking in this conversation, and I'm getting like the chills, you know, like especially when we're talking about Jesus, getting the chills, where I know that's like spirit communicating to me, like, okay, yeah, keep on this point. So it's really amazing to see that, you know, to look at your chart and then see it embodied in you, the physical manifestation of your soul. Jennifer Palo. Yes.
Well, thank you for all that, Scott. It's really incredible. I mean, you know, I'm very much, even though I've been following you for a while, I'm very much a novice when it comes to all the language of astrology. But I do have your book. Oh. And so I started looking at that again, right?
Yeah, awesome. Yes, the basics of astrology.
Yeah, I had bought the, you know, basically the download
the PDF,
file.
Yeah.
So yeah. I printed it up and I started, you know, reviewing some of the things. But it's really amazing to me that you can look at that chart and gather all of that, and that's a real gift. So thank you.
You know, I was going to say, you're welcome. You're welcome. You know, I mentioned how we're in the age of Pisces. Like they say that the age of Pisces began with the birth of Christ. And it lasts, you know, like 2,150 years or so. So we're reaching the end of this age, and things are getting more confusing. And through that confusion, we need greater faith.
Yeah.
Where we recognize that we're not in control. I'm not in control here. I need to put my faith in a higher power that is looking after me, that is supporting me, that created me, that's like, how did I end up here? You know, looking at the astrology, I'm like, okay, it makes sense. This is who I am. This is God's code, you know, so I need to connect to this higher power to help guide me and not think that I'm just this speck of dust in the middle of space floating around on a rock, you know, that's kind of meaningless. No, my soul really matters.
Yeah.
And so does every soul. Every soul matters. The next time the planets and stars will be aligned in the way that they were aligned when you were born is over 25,000 years from that date, time, and place. Like you hear that and you're like, there must be a God, you know, like there must be a higher power. Like this is not random.
Yeah. I love that. I love how you put that. I agree with that wholeheartedly. And I think, you know, no matter what my story or your story or anybody who's listening and all the people in our lives around us, and we've all got hard things in our story, but there's something there for us. There is a loving source. There is, you know, no matter what. And even for people who are recently traumatized with the, you know, the LA fires and losing loved ones and so on. I mean, it's, you know, another area of study that I've done too, where there's a teacher, his name is Ashok Gupta, and he says, you know, everything that happens, you know, isn't necessarily for our good, you know, because people say, oh, it's for your good, and they'll just kind of spiritual bypass and, you know, and when here you've been through something painful, but he said, but it is for our growth. It is for our growth.
Yeah, exactly.
I believe that.
That's it. Because like, you know, this life is about suffering. And that's why Jesus is kind of like the ultimate totem of
Mm.
suffering, you know, because it's like if he's this person who's perfect and unblemished in every way, but had to go through the greatest amount of suffering, where you're like, okay, well, at least I didn't have to do that. I didn't have to carry a cross through the streets and be flogged and wear the crown of corns and then hang on a cross. Like, yeah, I've gone through some suffering, but it wasn't that, you know. But that's what this life is. It's about experiencing the suffering, the joy, the pain, the elation, all of it. You know, when you look at the language of astrology and you look at that circle where your chart is, and there's a cross all the way through the center, that represents the symbol for Earth, which is a cross of matter inside the circle of spirit, which represents the place where the eternal soul materializes into a physical body. Why? Why does that happen? Because at this point in time, our soul needed to come here to experience life in the world of matter, which can be a very harsh reality. And through that pain and suffering, we're able to grow and
Yeah.
evolve and become enlightened in a way that we wouldn't be able to if we were just a soul floating out around in the ether.
Yeah. And I like when the point you were making about the cross, and the thing that's so wonderful about Jesus too is he like made a way for us to actually have a direct relationship to the divine. Like no priest needed, no none of that. You
Mm-hmm.
know, obviously those people are put in place to lead, you know, a congregation and so on, but you don't need to go to the priest in order to have a relationship with God. And
Right.
that's something that Jesus came to kind of transform once for all. So we all have the same access to God. We don't
Yes.
have to like go through, you know, a structure of religion or whatever. And so I think that's beautiful that,
Mm.
you know, we have equal access. It's just a
Yes.
matter of if we accept it, you know, and we
Exactly.
recognize that it's there for us.
Yes. Beautiful. Beautiful. Well, thank you, Jennifer. It's been so great to connect with you here and to receive your wisdom and your inspiration of your story and uh, just everything that you're doing to inspire those who read The Healers Are Rising. And that's your light that you're sharing out there into the world, and through everything else that you do through your work in the community. I know you're really involved in the community as
Mm.
well, and through your church and outside of the church.
Yeah, I'm with the
So
NAACP, so
yeah,
yep, largest
exactly.
largest and oldest civil rights organization in the nation. So
Which is
and
very unright wing Christian.
yeah, yeah, but I tell you what, my friends in our local branch that I've been with since 2020, when I joined after George Floyd, they
Mm,
are some of the most faith-filled people I know. The Black
hmm.
church is such an inspiration. There's so many people, you know, from the Black church who are involved in that,
Yeah.
and they know the way of suffering as a society, and they know the way of suffering as individuals.
Mm,
And yet, you know, they want to start the meetings with a prayer and give God praise, and we get into the work of serving our community. And so
yes.
I really admire the Black
Mm,
church in America. I think this is really where, I mean, I'm not saying that they can't also have problems when people
of
come in with
course.
ill intentions, right? But
Yes.
for the most part, I think if we want to study a history of faith in this nation, I think studying the Black church is really, you know, they really had to live it. They had to
Oh my
live that
God. I
reliance
mean,
on God.
who's
Yeah.
gone through more suffering than them, forced over here and brought into slavery. That's, yeah, to still have faith after that experience is immense. Yes.
And they've made it their own.
Yes.
They've made that
Oh,
faith their own. Yeah.
mm. Well, amazing, Jen. Thank you again. Share with the audience how they can find you on the socials, and then your Substack, and we'll list everything in the show notes as well. But just so people can reach out to you, connect with you, follow you, sign up for the Healers Are Rising.
Yeah. So my Healers Are Rising is at the Healers Are Rising, all one word, .substack.com. So you probably know Substack's just a publishing platform. And so that's where it is. And then I'm not super active on social, so that's my main thing. But I'm on Instagram, so that's Jennifer Ann Palo, with just ANN. So JenniferAnnPalo on Instagram.
Amazing. Well, thank you again, Jennifer. It's been an honor and a privilege to receive your wisdom and your story. And thank you for being here.
It's my pleasure, Scott. It's been a real privilege. And thank you for hosting me. Thank you for inviting me. I was
You're welcome.
Pleasantly surprised.
Okay, cool. Yes. Awesome. Thank you for listening to the Weekly Transit. Interviews and conversations from an astrological lens. This episode was produced by me, Scott Tejerian. Music written by Ben Leinbach from Listen Deep by Amber Herzog Lyman. If you're interested in being a guest on the Weekly Transit, you can email me at scott@theweeklytransit.com. Wishing you all the best as you ride the planetary waves.